The year was the late 1800s, a time when the British Empire's ambitions swept boldly across Africa. Along the fertile banks of the Niger River, the Anuma people lived independently, deeply rooted in their customs, communities, and sacred land. For generations, they prospered through trade, farming, and a way of life that balanced authority with tradition. Chiefs like Okono of Ashuku weren't just rulers. They were guardians of culture, spiritual anchors, and symbols of ancestral continuity. But to the British, the Anuma were not partners. They were barriers. Their fertile lands, strategic riverways, and local leadership stood in the way of Britain's growing appetite for dominance. Colonial authorities dismissed the chiefs as relics of the past, eager to replace them with hand-picked intermediaries who would bend to foreign rule and enforce imperial laws. Tensions began subtly. New taxes were levied, trade disrupted, and old alliances tested. The chiefs pushed back, peacefully at first, through petitions, quiet defiance, and refusal to accept unjust orders. But the situation escalated when the British issued a sweeping arrest order for several local leaders accused of inciting unrest. Chief Okono was among the first targeted. When soldiers arrived in Okwashuku to take him, the town stood united. Mothers shielded their children. Young men gripped machetes and hoes. Tools of farming now turned into weapons of defiance. The soldiers, confident in their arms and training, expected submission. What they met instead was a wall of resistance. As they marched toward the chief's compound, a shot rang out, not from the British, but from an Anuma youth hidden in the shadows. It was a warning. The villagers surged forward, chanting, shouting, refusing to surrender their leader. What began as an arrest spiraled into confrontation. Word spread quickly. Across the region, drums beat coded messages. The Echomeu Brotherhood, an informal but fierce network of warriors, mobilized. These were not trained soldiers. They were hunters, blacksmiths, farmers, united by a shared cause to defend Anuma land and freedom. Armed with machetes, spears, and a few smuggled muskets, they knew the land better than any invader. Their weapons were as much spiritual as they were physical. Arrow tips dipped in poisons from sacred river plants, charms tied to their waists. Skirmishes erupted. British patrols were ambushed in the forests, supply lines were disrupted. The imperial forces, used to open-field warfare, found themselves swallowed by jungle paths and ambushed at every turn. One officer would later write, "We were not fighting soldiers, but shadows." The most dramatic moment came as British forces advanced toward Ashioku. The Echomeu had prepared a deadly ambush. As the column entered a narrow, overgrown trail, arrows whistled from the canopy above. Warriors burst from hidden pits, striking with silent precision. The enemy's rifles were slow to reload, their formations quickly crumbled. Lieutenant Henry Thompson recalled, "We marched with confidence, but were devoured by the jungle." The forest fought alongside its people. Fires lit by the Echomeu sent smoke curling through the trees. Booby traps, poison stakes, and coordinated flanking attacks broke the British ranks. Though many Anuma fighters fell, their knowledge of the terrain allowed them to evacuate the wounded and disappear into the shadows. In retaliation, the British changed strategy. The war shifted from a military campaign to one of total destruction. Villages suspected of sheltering resistance fighters were torched, crops were burned, granaries destroyed, and families displaced. A British officer's journal read coldly, "No quarter. The war will end by fire and famine, if not by sword." Yet the Anuma fought on. This was no ordinary war. It was a moral stand, a resistance fueled by memory, land, and identity. Women played vital roles. They smuggled messages in baskets, hid fighters, and nursed the wounded. The resistance blended tradition and tactics. Children were told stories of warriors like Esokik, who once snuck into a British encampment and dismantled a cannon's wheels under the cover of darkness. Years passed. Battles turned to raids. Raids turned to whispers. The British called it the Invisible War. The Ekumeku fighters wore no uniforms. By day, they were fishermen and farmers. By night, they struck swift and vanished. The pressure on the British grew. Maintaining control of the Anuma region came at a high cost in money, manpower, and morale. The most daring blow came in 1899 near Asaba. A squad of Echomeu warriors crept under the cover of night toward the British supply depot. With arrows wrapped in flame, they set fire to ammunition crates. Explosions tore through the night sky. British soldiers rushed to respond, but the warriors had already vanished into the bush. The depot, a key logistical hub, was destroyed. British command called it a masterstroke of guerrilla cunning. But war takes its toll. Villages lay in ruins. Families were torn apart. Food became scarce. By the early 1900s, many resistance leaders had been captured or killed. Some fled to neighboring lands. Others died in battle. Slowly, the campaign lost momentum. Guerrilla strikes grew less frequent. The resistance fractured. Still, their legacy endured. The Ekumeku War did not end with surrender, but with exhaustion. The British never fully defeated the Anuma spirit, though towns were conquered. What the British saw as rebellion, the Anuma remembered as defiance. A fight not for power, but for dignity.